Hi, my name is Sascha Selke, and today I'd like to talk to you about a piece of music I wrote in my early 20s. I thought it might be interesting to you because it was written for an interesting instrument, the player piano. So the player piano is, as the name suggests, a piano. But it is not meant to be played by a human pianist, at least that's not its main purpose. The player piano, in its original form, can record anything played on its keys and pedals onto a long strip of paper by punching holes, referring to the actions of the player, into the paper. Then, when you set it to replay mode, it reads those punches from the paper and reproduces the exact actions of the player. So this was an early form of performance capture, if you will. And to this date, there still exist paper strips representing the playing of famous and long-dead composers and pianists such as Ferruccio Busoni, Claude Debussy, Camille Saint-Saëns, Alexander Scriabin, Max Reger, Edvard Grieg, Gustav Mahler, Richard Strauss, and, of course, of George Gershwin. Now, the first player piano was built in 1895 by Edwin Scott Votey in Detroit, USA, and branded Pianola. Player pianos soon became pretty popular, but went out of fashion in the 1920s when acoustically recorded music became more easily available and at a much lower price. So, where is the connection between the player piano and my own music writing? That is the question. Well, let's go back to the 1980s. Mid-1980s, I was in my early 20s studying philosophy, musicology, and art history at the University of Salzburg, and I had just fallen in love with the films of Peter Greenaway and their music. Michael Nyman's scores for The Draftsman's Contract and A Z and Two Noughts had blown me away. And then came 1987. And Greenaway's new film, The Belly of an Architect, featuring the music of someone I had never heard of before, the Belgian composer Wim Mertens. I was mesmerized, and I remember coming home from the movie theater still radiating with excitement, and I immediately sat down at my piano and tried to write down all I could remember from the score of the film. I had been a fan of Philip Glass and, as I said before, of Michael Nyman for quite a while. But to me this was a somewhat new and very specific kind of minimal music. More emotional than Glass, less elaborate maybe than Nyman, but therefore also somehow more direct, more immediate. I had fallen in love with a composer yet again. It may be that loving music makes you kind of polyamorous, at least as far as it concerns composers. So, of course, I wanted to write something inspired by his music, especially his more dynamic and rhythmically driven pieces. I was also quite painfully aware that I would never be able to perform such a piece myself, knowing the very narrow borders of my meager piano skills. So I thought, why not have it performed by a modern version of a player piano? And why not push the limits of performability a bit out of the comfort zone of any sane pianist by making it really fast? So I wrote a piece called Caracalla, in deep reverence for the score of The Belly of an Architect. If you watch the movie, I think you'll understand. So I set the tempo to about 220 quarter notes per minute, featuring a constant arpeggio of 16th notes, which adds up to about 880 16 notes per minute, that is about 14 notes per second. And I had it performed by what you could call an early version of a DAW or DAW, a digital audio workstation, using the sound of a professionally sampled piano. Now, a DAW can be used very much like a player piano. The difference is that in a DAW, the notes are not represented by punches in paper, but by markings in a MIDI track. MIDI stands for Musical Instruments Digital Interface, and it is a software convention that defines parameters such as the pitch of a note, the beginning of the note, its end, the strings with which the corresponding key is struck on the keyboard, and so on. Actually, a MIDI track in a DAW can look very similar to a strip of paper controlling a player piano, and in fact, most modern player pianos are not controlled by paper strips anymore, but by MIDI devices. By the way, the similarities between the MIDI view in a DAW and the paper strip of a player piano are no coincidence at all. Several of the most popular DAWs, such as FL Studio, Ableton Live, and Apple's Logic Pro, literally call their MIDI view piano roll, a direct reference to the player piano's paper strip, which was usually stored as a roll of paper. Just like this one. Well, not exactly like this one, of course. But now, without further ado, here it is, Caracalla.